Stop. Stop performing someone else's script. It's time to become the writer, actor, director, and producer of your own success. Welcome. I'm Dean Denardi, your host, and this is the Theatrics of Success. Who wrote your script to leadership? The Mask of Leadership, how performing strengths can nearly cost you your identity. How often are you living, a version of yourself that was written by somebody else's either model or expectations? Every one of us is born authentic, but then as we go through life, we're told how to be strong, how to not to cry. Leaders have all the answers, and success means confidence. And somewhere along the way, you stop and you ask, am I really being me? Am I being the best that I can be, or the best leader that I can be? And, or am I playing this enough? And I'd like to introduce you. Today's guest discovered something remarkable, and she spent years becoming a leader who was supposed to be a certain type of leader, and then discovered that maybe that leadership style wasn't aligned with her identity. And she's going to take us through a little bit of her journey and see what it looks like on leadership in coming from a military perspective and also corporate perspective, and what it means for you in your life and yourself as an individual and your authenticity as a leader. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Jenny Milton to the show. Thank you, Jenny, for coming to Theatrics of Success.
Thanks for having me, Dean.
Great. Wonderful. Nice to see you. You shared with me your story, and I thought it was really kind of interesting because I had not as extreme of an experience, but I had an experience myself where I had realized that I was being trained to be a leader without realizing it in my position. I didn't join up for it. It just sort of happened inherently. And then years later, I was like, this doesn't work. It's not me. What do you do? And, faced with the questions of self-identity but yet it worked for them. Why doesn't it work for me? Am I not good enough? And, I went through all this stuff, and I could see how there was some similar underlining processes that you went through. And I think it's pretty amazing how you came out of it. I'd love to hear about it. So without any more of my yibber yabber, I want to ask you, who was Jenny before Sandhurst? Who was she? What mattered to her? What type of person was she? And, before going into, military training and so forth, where did you come from? Your identity of either self or leadership?
Well, that's such a huge question. Straight in there.
Go right in. Listen, but you don't have to tackle all of it. It's just a just a scoped question. It's just kind of on a get because it's a journey that you processed and went through, as we all do. And, I'll share mine if you share yours.
Yeah, 100%. No, I'm more than happy to share. That's why I'm here. And it's a really good question to give context to how my military leadership journey ended up being what it was, and how I eventually came back to myself. So I guess me before the military, it's really important that I stress that I had no idea, the term leadership didn't really enter my vocabulary, for a long, long time, throughout my life, because this wasn't necessarily a path that I felt was open to me. And to give context, so in the UK I'm from, there's certainly people that have it a hell of a lot worse, but I grew up in a lower socioeconomic background. Myself and my brother are kind of first generation to be university educated, so that hopefully gives some context in terms of when I look back at my experience of school, and I think of, did I really have any leaders? Probably the closest person I now understand was my athletics coach, but I wouldn't have said I ever saw him as a leader. And I didn't necessarily have role models around me that were out there as leaders, were leading huge corporations or driving causes that they really believed in. You know, there was what I felt was a very clear path for me, which didn't involve leadership. It didn't involve a particularly great career. It was kind of a standard set path. I think probably what changed me and what really helped me as a youngster and brought out a fight, a determination in me was being an athlete. I happened to just fall into it. My brother fell into it, and then I kind of followed him. And that is a thread that runs throughout my life, that really, you know, if I was to think about who I was before I became a leader, before I became a military leader, it was athletics that had the most profound impact on me. So it developed in me a belief beyond that I could go beyond what I thought was possible. It gave me confidence. It gave me resilience in bucketfuls. So I think if I think of who I was before leadership, I think of me as a young athlete.
Okay, so is your athletic background, it actually gave you the broader scope of personal possibility. It taught
Yes.
you to say that you didn't have to have the normal life, the standard that you thought that you were kind of destined for because of where you came from or who your circles of influence were around you. And that's just what happens. So by getting into sports, it sort of gave you that, okay, I can do more. I can do better. It is possible. I am capable.
Yes. And to make a really, I was going to say tenuous link, but I don't actually think it is. Through my time as athletics, like one of my huge role models was Kelly Holmes. Now, Kelly Holmes did the Olympic 800 and 1500 meter double, and she was a sergeant in the army. So I'd never actually, I'd never considered the army before then. Again, to go back to it, like I didn't really know as a kid. Like it was kind of like, genuinely, it was like, you know, maybe I'll get a job in a shop or become a hairdresser.
Right.
Like I genuinely didn't really know what was out there for me beyond what I saw around me. And then
Yeah,
with
and that was the link between athletics and military. I mean, there was now all of a sudden you saw some sort of correlation. Was before you had no way of linking the two or the possibilities behind the two being connected.
Yeah, 100%. So like I saw Kelly Holmes have this amazing athletics career whilst also being a sergeant in the army. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, I want to do that.
Right. Nice. So it was also nice that it was a female. So you are able to relate on a more personal level. So that was really nice too. So, you know, admiration in
100%.
In that kind of full circle then. So, okay. So now you got this inspiration, right? And then what happened? Did you just go downtown and sign up and you just went into thinking that, you know, if I join the service, then, you know, the training will help me be a better athlete or maybe just a better person, or I don't know, but it seemed like it did good for her. You know, like what was the next step like that took you into Sandhurst?
Yeah, so I wish I'd followed that path. But it ended up being, you know, a few detours along the way. So I, unfortunately, as many young athletes do, I stopped competing just before university. You know, it's difficult to address this, but essentially I was one of the few in my peer group that was an athlete. So all of my like immediate friends were going out, they were partying and all the rest of it. And stupidly, I wish I could go back and shake my 17-year-old self, but I thought I was missing out. And I quit athletics but still went off to university. I managed to get an academic scholarship instead of a sporting scholarship. And then when I left university, it was a recession. Okay. So nobody was getting jobs anywhere. So I was wandering past the career office one day. So I'd kind of got stuck in a job that, it was definitely a clock watching job. I was completely unchallenged. I was bored out of my mind. I knew I could do more, but I'd parked the whole army thing the minute I parked my athletics. So I was walking past the career office one day and just thought, oh, do you know what? I'll just go in. I'm in town anyway. I'll just go in. End up having a conversation, and the recruitment sergeant that I spoke to said to me, hey, you've got a degree, you could go to Sandhurst. And I remember genuinely being like, what's Sandhurst? And that's how little leadership and the concept of leadership, and especially me being a leader, featured to me. And then the more I started to look at it and the more he started to tell me about it, I was like, oh, this is really exciting. And I definitely think for someone from my background, you get swayed by pomp and reputation of Sandhurst.
Right.
And then that was when I started my journey for going through selection to get into Sandhurst and become an officer.
I was reading, or I was listening at this quote this morning, is sometimes your diversion is the best thing that could happen for you because something else is coming up, so like quitting athletics and going to school anyway, but still getting the academic degree, instead of a sports scholarship. It all kind of seemed like it was driving you into that direction, like in the ethers, subconsciously, because it was still happening for you. There was still, every time you turned around, there was still a yes, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was still like sort of inviting you down that path. Just for people listening who aren't completely aware, Sandhurst is the Royal Military Academy, and they're known for their military training, leadership, and so forth. So that's what we're referencing, because I wasn't aware of it at first until I first heard it from Jenny. I live in Finland, so the J sounds like a ye. So sometimes now I have to remember.
I like Jenny.
Jenny.
We can go with that.
Okay, with a little Finnish twist on it. So now, okay, so you get to Sandhurst, and you're like, at first, I'm sure there was like a wow moment, like, wow, this is like, it's bigger than life sort of thing, because its reputation is global. It's founded, there's like also, this is like the Royal Military Academy. This is like, God, this is where they teach you it, right? But you shortly found out that it wasn't it so much. So take us a little bit on that journey. What did it mean for you to apply, to actually get in and start off and go and what was your reflection in the beginning, early years of leadership or of the dynamics there at Sandhurst that, kept you engaged at least?
Yes. Yeah. I will go back. I'll go back a couple of steps, because it was just a really good point that you made previous to talking about Sandhurst and just giving some context. I will say that even though it was indirect, I always had this feeling when I was younger that running would be, like, athletics would be my ticket to freedom, i.e. get me out of this kind of, what I felt from my demographic was like the set menu of life, I just, and it did, like, I just want to, like, acknowledge that what you said is 100% true, because even though it was indirect, it did, because, it gave me that resilience, it gave me that determination, it gave me that fight, which absolutely helped me in my military training and military career, and has helped me ever since to go on to have the successes that I have done in my career. So yeah, like what you just said was spot on. And then looking at Sandhurst, I don't know if I found out that it wasn't it. I think I did in a lot of ways, but also that I wasn't it. So I think it was
okay, right, yeah,
a mixture of the two. Let me try and explain this as kind of eloquently as I can. So I guess, first of all, I will emphasize that to me, like, I'd passed selection, but I still don't really know what leadership meant. Like, there was still an element of me that felt like, especially going into that military environment, that leadership was just being the loudest person in the room, the
Right,
biggest voice,
right, right.
the biggest and the quickest voice, the first person to say, oh, you do that, or you do that, or you go over there. But yeah, some of the things that I witnessed at Sandhurst, like, bearing in mind we talk about it as, it's widely regarded up there with West Point, the one of the best military leadership academies in the world. It was the leadership that we were taught was very authoritarian. It was very much like, I distinctly remember people saying to me, like, don't ever let your soldiers, see you make a mistake, or don't ever admit that you don't understand this, or you've got something wrong, and you have to be the best at everything in front of your soldiers. And I was there thinking, Christ,
But this is interesting because you bring up a point that, okay, so the history of so I'm obviously from the States, and because we've discussed this before, but for our listeners' sake, but so I'm just going to reference that because that's what I know the most. Now, I've never been in the military, but I know plenty of people who have, and I've seen some shows that are very true to life representations. And essentially, if you're in command of a platoon or a company, and you literally have, if you ever go to face war or you're in a situation, you have their life in your hands, and they need to know that you know what you're doing. So like that, even if you're wrong, don't show them that you're wrong. Figure it out in your head and, pivot if you have to. Essentially a quick pivot is a good leader. It's just execution matters, but it's like we have a very strong authoritarian leadership personality in the U.S. military as well. Whereas, like, they have to know what you're doing. Period. Point blank, without question. And I know back in the days, I know that it has changed over the years, especially since there's more women in military, and also now the whole thing with homosexuality in the military has brought up all kinds of other issues and change of policies and stuff like that. I mean, the brutality of the training and the, hazing, insisting, that type of real hardcore authoritarian, or that hazing is so brutal that, it's like almost brings you to the brink of death without the war, and in many cases, we can get into this later. I'm not trying to bash the military, but I'm trying to say there's a consistency of authoritarian rule in leadership training. And I guess my question is, I guess it's a fine line between a point where that works and a point where it's overkill and it doesn't work and it's harmful.
Yes. So this is one of the things that there's so much I want to pick up on what you just said. This is one of the things that I feel where I found the military was really lacking in terms of the leadership they taught us. It was so black and white, and it wasn't situational enough, and it did not suit the real world army. You are absolutely 100% correct to say, if you're in, if you're like, I'm going to go back to my day. I mean, I deployed to Afghanistan, but thankfully, never saw kinetic action. If you're in that situation, then absolutely your soldiers need to have 100% trust in you, trust in your decisions, and know that you know what you're doing, and you need to be authoritarian. Everyone needs to be exceptionally clear on where they need to be, what they need to be doing. Yes, however, how does that leader get to that point if they go through a training establishment where they're already terrified to say, "Excuse me, Colour Sergeant, I don't understand that. Excuse me, Colour Sergeant, I didn't understand that point. I don't know what we're doing." If your training environment is like that, where you should be making the mistakes, you should be able to hold your hand up and ask, you should be able to say, "I don't understand," then you're never going to get to that point of being able to, like having enough trust in yourself.
Right. So they're learning from the get-go not to question it, and they may be actually end up doing the wrong thing because it wasn't safe environment for them to say, "I want to learn. I'm questioning this. Can you help me understand so I can make better decisions later in a true situation?" So you're saying
100%.
during the training period is when you should be able to fall, ask questions, question everything, and instead they're told, "No, don't question." And there's where the gap lies.
Yeah. And I can give a very real example from myself. So like, I was a complete military virgin in inverted commas when I joined, when I started Sandhurst. I'd never touched a rifle before. I'd like barely looked at a map in my life. Like all of these military skills, like core military skills, were very new to me. And we go through weapon handling tests, as we should do, to make sure that we're proficient on our rifle, our standard rifle. And I remember getting a notebook out in one of my weapons handling sessions to try and write down the steps of the functions test. And I remember the colour sergeant saying to me, "Don't be bleeping stupid. Put that notebook away. What are you doing?" But for me, that was how I learned. Like I learned
Right.
very methodical. That would have really helped me. But because I got told to put my effing notebook away,
Right.
I didn't then have that to refer to later when I wanted to do some kind of revision in my own time. And that's a very, it's not the sexiest example, but
Right. No, but it's a real life example and happens all the time. I mean, people learn differently, right? So you can't expect everybody to learn the same way or retain the information the same way. However, I'm going to challenge this just for a second.
yes,
Because I come from a background where just because that's the way you've been doing it and it has been working for you does not mean you cannot learn a new way. You just need to be open. And sometimes people, in order to get to that place, because they can't do it on their own, they need to be put in a situation where they're almost forced to do it another way so that they can see that they're capable of doing it a different way.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
It does.
So in a way, I understand that practice. However, I also understand that the delivery of it matters. Okay,
Yeah.
because you also got to get, some people have to be receptive to it to some degree, or else it's complete resistance. However, I also understand the breakthrough of complete resistance.
Yeah.
So, because we have such mental blocks on who we think we are, what we are capable of or not capable of, and that's driven by our mindsets. Now, what's on our mind, how we think about ourselves, the world, us in it, and how we interact and so forth. But that mindset often in times needs to be challenged because it doesn't suit you to where you want to go. Now, maybe you didn't know where you wanted it to go at the time, and you're just kind of on this train and riding it along, but you were in a program where your sergeant knew where you were going to end up. And he had a job to get you there one way or the other.
Yeah.
Right? So in that sort of light, now I'm not taking away what your experience was or devaluating, the challenge you had, but I'm sort of opening this up in a sense to trying to understand a little bit better because of this parallel learning dynamic that is real. It's just as real. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the key is in delivery. So we was in a learning environment, and I absolutely do want to caveat this with, I fully understood that part of the model was putting us under a lot of pressure to simulate those, later potential combat situations where we would be under so much pressure because we would have people's lives at risk. I think the key when you're in a learning environment is being able to flex up and down, and that delivery and getting someone to that end goal. It might have been, hey, don't worry about taking notes on this. I'm going to walk you through this. And if you need some extra time later, I'll be there to support you. It achieves the same aim where I've put my notebook away and gone, okay, well, I need to flex up and, embrace a different learning style, but I haven't been shamed in the meantime, and then shamed into silence, and then shamed into conformity going forward, which then led to bigger issues.
Okay. So again, we're going to say that delivery matters. So yes, both are real things, but yeah, it's the delivery. So your experience was more on the delivery side, not the disagreeing with what maybe the way it was being done, but it was the how it was being done. Yes. More so, at least in the beginning, from what I hear you saying.
And it comes back to the point that one of the points that I wanted to touch on earlier around why I felt the military leadership syllabus was so inflexible, because as we, conversation previous, absolutely in the military there needs to be a really strong command presence, and that authoritarian and that ability to flex into that style of leadership. But the reality of the military, or certainly when I was in the military, I was in for 8 years. I deployed on operations twice for a total of 12 months. For 7 years, I was doing, barrack life, exercises, training with my soldiers, where you need a different approach. You need that more vulnerable, more authentic, more nurturing approach to build that trust and teamwork and connection and safety with your soldiers, which is where I found I failed and where I found that the leadership I taught.
Okay, so you kind of answered my question. So you realized where the gap was for you. And when you had your own leadership command, you realized that this is what they need, but you didn't realize that till later. So in the military setting, did you not get a chance to implement some of these new understandings of the way you feel that it should be or could be better?
It was complete hindsight, because,
okay,
to give, again, I gave a very kind of simple, like low level example but the conditioning from my military career ran deep, because actually, and we probably shouldn't go into it too much, but I look back now and I realize like just how much we experienced. Humiliation was used as a tool. I saw bullying used as a tool.
Right.
I saw sexual harassment going on whilst I was in the military, and that led to a completely unsafe environment, especially when this behaviour is being modelled by leaders and high up leaders as well. So it was a completely unsafe environment, and what that generates is a cycle of shame and silence. So This was, as a leader, you were in the army, you were left, unless you had really high levels of self-awareness, which I think is something we all develop throughout our life, but I don't think all of us have a great grasp on, you're left actually completely unaware of how you're impacting your team.
Right. I mean, you touched on a few points, and I don't want to dismiss them, and I want to get back to them because I think they're important to acknowledge. But I do want to ask you one or two things first. I wanted to ask you, do you feel that Sandhurst taught you who you had to become?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
All right. And then do you feel that that success of being that required you to be somebody you didn't recognize?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was so far removed from
Who you thought
I
you
am.
were or who you thought you had to become. So it was, this identity was being imposed on you. Now, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not a good thing. I think that it's better if someone extracts your true identity and gives you tools how to use it.
That extraction requires a safe environment.
It does, but you are not in an emotional or mental safe environment. I don't want to go on like a whole Sandhurst bash thing, but yes, I understand, and I did my little research, but Sandhurst has been under scrutiny before. I mean, especially there was a sexual harassment case that, erupted from a suicide back in 2019. That was like a big public thing. They've had different misconduct, filings against them and everything. And I'm gonna follow that up without getting into that or naming names or whatever. But I'm gonna follow that up with, the U.S. military was under scrutiny for years, especially we were under heavy scrutiny, not for the bullying, even though that happened. More though when, how do you say it? More when like the sexual revolution shifted, and it was more about homosexuality, and there was a huge thing. It was hugely publicized, where there was a lot of bashing, there were suicides, there was bullying. It was bad. So I think it happens all over the world. However, it doesn't justify it. And now the times are changed. There needs to be an evaluation of what not only I think the military how they should structure, but they definitely should shift what it means to, what the military means, what it means to be in the military, and what its position is, and then how leadership, without a doubt. We hear problems about it all the time, and you obviously have experienced some of them. So now I'm going to ask you, now you have this mask of leadership, right? It kind of like, it created an identity for you because it became a part of you. It became who you were.
Yeah.
Because it was so many years, and that type of activity and constant hammering of a person, of a mindset, way to think, actions being taken or responses, or it changes people, changes you to be that identity. I can speak to that part because I had a similar experience. I grew up in a family that we had our own businesses, and my father, he was in the military in his youth, and when he took that authoritarian training, he liked it. He was the type of personality where he needed it, and it worked for him as an individual. So he felt it was good for others, so he gave it back. So for him, it worked. And I don't know, maybe it was also the generation, because there's obviously huge generation gap here, my father to you and I, but the people under his employment were okay with it. They admired him. Listen, 9 out of 10 times he was right, but his delivery was horrible. It's like, come on, and I didn't realize this because I admired him. He was my father, whatever. I didn't realize this because I worked for the company for several years. As years went on, I was doing what he was doing. I became I was his student indirectly. He didn't teach me to do it. It was just the way he went. I figured it worked, so I do it. And I inherently acquired it. But something in the back of my head knew that it wasn't right. It didn't fit right, but I didn't know how to shift, change, or whatever. I was wearing a mask, and I didn't even realize I was wearing a mask until years later. Something just clicked. I was at work one day, and I'm demanding, I'm pushing, I'm like a mean son of a bitch. and I'm like, and these guys are twice my age, man. They're adult men. I'm like a punk kid. I'm like 18 years old. They're like 28, 32. They're married, got kids and families. This is their livelihood, right? And I'm bossing them around like I'm General Lee. And it took me another, I want to say like maybe 5, 8 years. And I felt so bad about the way I had been and realized that it wasn't me. That was my father through me, a false identity that I had acquired. And I went out of my way to try to apologize to as many of the men that were under, my management at the time of the company who were still around, and just express my sincere, that I was wrong, and that I felt bad. Now, I'm telling this story not only to share that I understand the falseness and how we are so impressionable, especially at certain times in our life. And then that becomes a false identity in how we not only look at ourselves, but others, but also, even though we can acknowledge somewhere in the back of our minds that something's not right, it's hard for us to shift away from it or to make that pivot, or it's like we don't completely understand it, or we haven't completely, gotten away from it, or whatever it is. So even though you kind of feel something's off, it hasn't met the point where, and like, so I can relate to that. And then the aha moment, which then brings me to the next phase with you, whereas like you left the military and went to work for Amazon.
Yes. Yeah.
And you had your aha moments in Amazon. The military people under your command might have admired you because they were used to it. This is the way it was. You were doing what everybody else did. It worked in that situation, whatever. Maybe some of them questioned it. Maybe some of them didn't. But because it was the culture of the environment, it was more acceptable. Would you say that?
It was definitely more acceptable. Yes, I would say acceptable actually, because it was normalized.
Right. Doesn't mean it was tolerated, but they accepted it. They couldn't do anything to change it, so it just was what it was. They dealt with it the best they could.
Yeah.
As individuals. Right.
Like, I think throughout my army career, like, I had that really unfortunate combination of trying to be super authoritarian and, like, I'm the boss, I'm the leader, without having the confidence to back it up, because I had absolutely zero confidence, because it got destroyed very early on at Sandhurst. And then, I was dragging myself through for the next 8 years, which I think, just makes it 10 times worse than being authoritarian with confidence. Being authoritarian with zero confidence was just...
Right. So there was another gap, whereas you learned a model and then you just became a robot.
Yeah.
Doing what you were taught, but no real confidence or courage or confidence to support it from a position of understanding or relationship to it, or self-identifying your own strength through that action.
Yeah.
And so that whole thing was missing. So that's really important, because I believe good leadership comes first from self-leadership. And in order to be a good self-leader, you have to self-identify. You need to have self-confidence, self-courage in believing in the way you think, what you do, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and that it resonates with you as an individual and your authenticity. And the power and the confidence and courage is driven organically. And then you have the ability to lead others. You're saying a lot of that internal piece was gone. It wasn't offered to build. And you had a hard time building it on your own, I would imagine, just because there was no role model for it. Or how do you do it when you're always being told to just do this, 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 and this?
Yeah.
There's almost no time to breathe, to self-evaluate or self-identify.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, look, it was really tricky. And I think in terms of, I missed a huge trick, and I'll always regret this in terms of being from the background I was from. I actually had a really good opportunity to connect with my soldiers much more strongly, because actually I was from like the same, if not very similar background to most of my soldiers, far more than I was the officer cohort. So I really missed that opportunity. And then when you talk about like role models, there were people within the army, certainly women higher up than me, that I admired. I admired for their career trajectory, the way they dealt with things, their intelligence, their perspective on things. But they were naturally so much more closer to the mould of the army officer than me, that it just always felt so inaccessible to me. And I was always having to pretend, and it was just so exhausting. And no wonder why by, the last couple of years of my time in the army, like, I deeply struggled with my mental health, like severe depression, severe anxiety. I was in a really bad way. And at that point, I'd been pretending and completely out of alignment with myself for 6-7 years.
Right. That's important, what you said about being out of alignment with yourself. And also the point of exhaustion. I remember when I had that aha moment of this isn't me, whatever, yada, yada, over the next couple months or a year or so, as I processed it and self-evaluated and everything, I couldn't believe how exhausted I was. It's exhausting to hold a mask on. That's not your own. That doesn't sit on you naturally. That when you have these false identities, that it is exhausting. And I'm going to take this like a little bit, I'm going to add a little bit here, because, Theatrics of Success is about looking at, identity and authenticity. And we play different roles as a wife, as a husband, as a, employee, as a business owner, as a father or mother, as a parent or as a child, or we play different roles in our life. And if you're not being authentic in each of those roles in your life, you're holding a mask, and it gets exhausting. I remember during that time in my life, I had realized that I was holding masks for different roles in my life. And it was like switching from one scene to the next in my life, boyfriend, son, manager, and all different masks. And none of them were really my own. They were all based on what I had learned. And I didn't transition yet between what I learned and self-identifying to authenticity, and then acquiring what I needed to enhance my authenticity to become who I naturally was. I didn't quite get there yet. But I did realize that this is exhausting, not being who I am. I don't know who I am, but doing what I'm doing is exhausting. I mean, it takes a lot to sit there and be something that you're not, even if you're so used to it for so many years. And I don't think you realize how exhausting it is until you realize it. In that moment of realization, then you're like, oh, it's almost like you can breathe, even though you don't know what to do with it. You may be completely oblivious what to do and what it all means, but it's like the realization itself is so freeing or lifting. Now you got a whole nother job, to replace what was.
Yeah.
But, right. I mean, that's a journey within itself, right? That's a whole nother ball of wax. How do you create, or how do you build then? How do you build yourself from nothing, right? But the truth of the matter is, it's never really nothing. It's about really going back inside, self-identifying and reconnecting with authenticity. And you will find that there's plenty of not nothing there. There's plenty of substance that is truly who you are, your sense of self. And you just keep building from that point. But when you totally lose it all, you have that moment of complete void. At least I did, where it's just like, this isn't me, and I don't know who to be, and I don't know how to act, and I don't know how to think. And oh my God, it's just, you're at the cliff's edge. But I want to share just for a moment, really quick, that this type of leadership and impressionism, wearing masks, it doesn't always come from. It's not just on military, or it's in everywhere in our life. Like I shared my story with growing up with a father who there was impressioned. It happens in schools. It happens at home. It's the most important thing is to recognize it. I just want to say that I think it's important for people to understand that a lot of what has happened is so applicable to many areas in our lives. Because as I would like for you to share is like, you took this whole thing and now you pivoted, you go to Amazon, right? You go to Amazon and there's like, everything I learned isn't working.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, now you're in real world, not military world. And it's just like, everything's falling apart.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So yeah, I started with Amazon as an area manager, and to your point, I was 30, 31 maybe, and it wasn't just 8 years of military unlearning you have to do. Like, again, to your point, like actually by that point, it's 30 years of holding up masks and trying to figure out who you are, and then being told you're not good enough as this, so you need to flex into this, and so on and so forth. So I started with Amazon, and I think I naturally had a slightly higher level of confidence because I'd left the military, and Amazon at that time were, they were very keen to hire ex-military people. So I already felt like, oh, well, they respect the background that I've come from. Like that's, it gives me a little boost and makes me feel quite confident. I would say I was, as an area manager at that point, I was very experienced in terms of management and leadership, versus some of my peers. And I'd inherited a shift that I guess was, classed as underperforming. And the difference with Amazon versus the army was actually the associates at Amazon, which is, what we call kind of our frontline workers, our operatives in the warehouse. They do have a lot of avenues to raise a voice about how they feel they're being led and managed, what they think about wider changes in the business, which I wasn't used to. So we had 360-degree reporting, and I remember after my first month sitting down with my boss, Tom, who is still a very good friend of mine to this day, and even that dynamic was so different. Like, he would laugh and joke with me. He'd ask me stuff about myself and my life and all the rest of it, which I just wasn't used to from military leadership. And then I get this first month of 360-degree reporting, and I've basically tanked. Like, I've completely tanked because I've been there going around, chopping and pointing and berating everyone that moves for not moving fast enough and all the rest of it, because I do have a very strong bias towards like high performance, but I was going about it completely the wrong way for this environment. I hadn't built that trust or connection with my team. So yeah, I'd completely tanked. And I remember having that conversation with Tom, and what was different was he wasn't going to me, Jenny, beep, 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 you were beeping beep. Like, he was, like I would expect in the military, he was, hey, like, can I help you? Do you need any support? Like, how does this feel to you? Like, and all the rest of it. And my default was to go back into military of deflecting, like, oh, well, the shift was underperforming anyway, and, they don't listen, or this is wrong, or that's wrong, anything but looking at myself and going, no, I've got this wrong. And I'm really glad that in that moment, for whatever reason, and it may have been the prior exhaustion, I saw that opportunity and went, I've got this wrong. I am not leading these people effectively. I've not built a good connection with these people. They don't trust me. They don't know me. I don't know them because I've made no effort to get to know them. I've got this wrong. And that was my moment where I was just like, oh, thank God. I can just stop all of this, like constantly having to be the boss and hold on to all the power and the control, and everything must be done my way, because ultimately I don't know the operation at this point. So why would everything be done my way? I don't know it. So it was so liberating and so freeing. It was like breaking out of a cage for like the first time in so long to just be able to go, right, good. Do you know what? Tomorrow I can go down to the floor and I can just talk to my team. I can just have conversations with them about them. I can ask them what they think we should do to improve the shift. I can admit to them that I don't really understand this process or that process. And it was just like a weight had been lifted. And yeah, that was my aha moment.
Nice. That also not. You say that it was freeing, and it was like the cage, you got let out of the cage, and it was just like a weight was lifted. But at the same time, I'm sure it also felt very empowering.
Yes.
It was like it gave you another level of confidence, not confidence that we typically think of in a sense of, yes, I can do this. I am confident of my skills or ability. It more gave you as just like, I believe in myself type confidence, not knowing what was ahead, but you felt like a connection to a truer sense of self.
Yeah. Look, knowledge is power, right? And for the first time in my career, I had the knowledge from my direct team that I wasn't leading them effectively.
Right.
I wasn't effective in what I was doing. And even though, like, God, it's vulnerable and it's difficult to take, the other option was moving forward without that knowledge. And what that knowledge gave me and the leader I then became was, really high performing leader that built high performing teams. And I never had to worry about performance again, really. I don't ever really remember in my career after that having to run around shouting at people about rates and so on. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have taken that going forward. But yeah, knowledge is power. And even though it wasn't a nice message to receive, it was definitely a message.
It gave you the insight you needed to make the shift.
100%. Yeah.
Right. So now I want to ask you, this was like a moment of authenticity, right? This is where your authentic leader finally was able to step up to plate. This is where like you gained control by having no control.
Yes.
Right. So now I want to ask you, in those times, what's authentic leadership feel like?
It feels consistent, as in I'm with my friends, I'm at work, I'm at home, and I'm not up and down and all over the place in terms of who I present.
Right.
I'm more consistent. And of course, there's variations. Like, am I going to walk into work and start talking to my colleagues about the stuff that I talk to my friends about?
Right.
Probably not. But, are my core values and the way I present and align to them the same, or basically the same throughout all them situations? Yes, they are. And I don't feel like I'm getting whiplash between the different versions of myself in different situations in my life anymore. And I think that's what I found so hard and so jarring for so many years, whereas now I'm much more consistent. The person my friends get is the person my colleagues get, just with a professional polish.
Sure. So that is a wonderful description, and that's a great identity for describing or saying what authentic leadership is. That it's consistency. It's you get to be who you are while still leading yourself and others in your life, no matter whether you're with your friends, at work. There's a consistency to who you are being. The who you truly are. And yes, there's variations in situations or what deserves what attention or not, but you're not being something that you're not. There's consistency through who you are being. And that's a great way to look at it and to describe it. I like that. So oh man, I just want to end on that note. That's just like, it defines everything. It's just like, it was a defining moment. It's just like, so
If I could, like, just
Yeah.
add one more thing.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
If you were to ask me what authenticity in leadership sounds like, I would definitely say laughter. Like, I don't remember ever laughing. You know, we had moments with my team when I was in the army, but definitely, like, you know, I've had some of the most fun and meaningful moments of like genuine laughter with my teams as I've allowed myself to be in that space where I can accept, you know, like, this is funny, I can poke fun at myself, etc. Yeah, and I think it's a good barometer for anyone out there. Like, how much genuine laughter do you hear within your team? For how safe do your team feel?
Right. I want to ask you this question. If 20-year-old Jenny, walked through the door today and they were just about to, go into Sandhurst,
Yeah.
what is one bit of advice you would give her?
Oh, God. See, part of me is thinking, tell her don't, but I can't deny that, you know, for all I've said, like, Sandhurst was a really, really, like, crucial part of my life, and it's opened doors. So, you know, I don't want to be a hypocrite here. Oh God, what would I tell her? That's such a good question. I would probably tell her not to hide from herself in terms of, and understand that the criticism and ridicule that I did receive at times was because I'm different, but being different doesn't mean being bad or wrong.
Okay, that's an important message.
Mm,
Being different doesn't mean being bad or wrong.
yeah.
And how often growing up at school and at home are we told exactly that being different is bad or wrong? We're supposed to do what they say, how they say, what they say, why they say. And it's all only based on their experience. It's not about who we are, instead of shifting it, right? And it's bad or wrong to do that.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
an important message, because it allows you to go into an experience and to be different, or to challenge it, or to see yourself differently, but maybe not to be able to act on it, doesn't mean you're bad or wrong.
No.
I love that. That's incredible. This has definitely been, your story is hands down, inspirational. And yet at the same time, it's a cautionary tale. It really is both. It's about, self-identity. It's about leadership. It's about impressionism. It informs through personal story and journey. But also cautionary about, self-identity and the external influences that, assist, in impressionism. Like, I talk about in my book as being the conditions of life. These conditions of life impress upon you who to be, how to be, what to be, how to think, who to think, and they become your identity over time. And you really need to learn at some point in your life to question that, and self-evaluate. I think that's great. This was an incredible conversation, and thank you so much, Jenny, for coming on and being with us and talking with us, sharing your personal experience and story. I think it really makes a difference when it's personally shared, and people are willing to do that. So thank you very much. I honor that, and thanks again for joining us on Theatrics of Success.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation too, so thank you.